When I overheard my grandson whispering on the phone, something inside me crumbled. Grandpa's not all there anymore. If we get the papers signed soon, we can list the house before summer. They thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I lay perfectly still in my armchair, a knitted blanket over my knees and Maria's shawl draped across the back like it had been for decades. Outside, our cherry tree bloomed the way it always did in May, and yet something felt colder than winter inside that room. I just finished making tea. Black, with sugar the way they liked it. Fresh bread on the table. Homemade cherry jam. And that's when I heard them plotting the sale of the home I built with my own hands. We can help him downsize, the younger one added, his voice muffled through the hallway. He won't even remember this place in a year. I didn't interrupt. I didn't move. I just stared at the fireplace Maria and I had built stone by stone in the first year of our marriage. I watched the clock second-hand tick across a face we'd bought at a flea market 40 years ago. I felt my heart beat slow and deliberate in my chest, each thump sharper than the last. They thought I didn't know. That I was too old, too confused to understand what they were doing. But I heard every word. And I understood more than they thought. This wasn't about my safety. This wasn't about concern. It was about convenience. About money. About how to cash out the man who gave them everything. And that night, something shifted. Not with fury. Not even with sadness. Just a quiet, irreversible understanding. I had to protect what I built. I started building that house the year after Maria and I got married. 1957, we had nothing but a plot of land given to me by my father and a few savings from my job at the rail yard. Every wall, every beam, every stone was laid with my own hands or those of men who became like brothers over weekends of sweat and sunburn. Maria would bring us sandwiches and lemonade. Her laughter always traveled farther than the sound of the saws. We raised 3 children in that house. I installed the plumbing by hand, carved the baseboards, tiled the kitchen in a herringbone pattern because Maria saw it once in a magazine and said it felt like movement. I didn't know what that meant, but I figured it out. It took me 10 years to finish the attic. Another 5 to get the garden where she wanted it. Roses, wild mint, and a peach tree that never bore fruit but stayed anyway because Maria liked the way it leaned. When our children grew up and moved away, Maria insisted we keep the rooms just the way they were. For when they visit, she'd say, smoothing the quilt on our daughter's bed. And visit they did. For a while. After Maria died, I kept everything in its place. I still made tea in the mornings, still talked to her as I weeded the garden. Her scarf hung on the hook by the door, right where she left it the last winter we had together. Then came the grandchildren. They were small at first, bright-eyed and curious. I'd take them fishing down by the creek or show them how to split wood. They always asked about the old clock in the hall. I told them Maria said it would only stop ticking when the house no longer had love. They laughed then. They don't laugh now. I started giving. Helping with tuition, with their first cars, with their weddings. Every envelope handed over with a smile and a handshake. No strings. No expectations. Just the hope they would remember. They remembered me when they needed help moving. Or when their boilers broke. Or when their accounts overdraft. And I was proud to help. Proud to be the patriarch. But over time, I noticed the visits grew shorter. Phone calls rarer. The thank yous became texts. The hugs, rushed. And lately, there were no questions about how I was. Just quick updates on what they needed. Last Christmas, they sat in the living room, scrolling through their phones while I pulled out the ornaments Maria had sewn by hand. I held one up to show them. No one looked. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at Maria's side, still untouched. And I thought, maybe they've forgotten. Maybe I gave too much. The cherry tree outside bloomed early this year. I was pruning it when my knees gave out and I had to sit a while. That was when my grandson, Daniel, said I should consider moving to assisted living. It'd be safer, he said. And we could handle the property. You wouldn't have to worry. He smiled when he said it. The same smile he used when he borrowed $10,000 for his startup that folded after 6 months. I smiled back. But inside, I was beginning to see clearly. This home, this garden, every beam in the attic and stone in the foundation, they didn't just house memories. They were the memories. And I realized they wanted to tear them down to build something that didn't even include me. Maria had warned me once, in the early years, when I had given too freely to our youngest. Don't let love become a ladder, George, she said. You give them enough to stand, not to climb over you. I didn't understand then. Now I did. It began with whispers, ones they didn't think I could hear. At first, it was small, passing comments, sideways glances, unfinished sentences when I walked into a room. I noticed. Of course I did. They believed my age made me deaf, blind, and docile. But I wasn't. I started listening more carefully. I stopped humming while doing chores. I walked more quietly. What I heard, over time, stopped my heart more than once. Claire, on the phone in the garden, we can't wait forever. The market's hot now. He's still lucid enough to sign, but not for long. Daniel, in the garage one afternoon, he doesn't need all this space. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a full workshop. It's wasteful. He could be somewhere simpler. Safer. Then came the visit that broke the illusion. They arrived unannounced with pastries and polite smiles, full of brightness that felt too sharp, too rehearsed. Claire sat across from me at the kitchen table and took my hand. Daniel hovered nearby, sipping tea he didn't like, looking out at the garden. Grandpa, she began, we've been thinking about your safety. The house is big. And you've had that fall last winter. Remember? I remember, I said. It was a slippery step. I fixed it. She pressed on, but what if next time it's worse? Daniel found this lovely community. It's not far, Golden Pines. It has a library, walking paths, even a woodworking room. Daniel pulled out a brochure, glossy and cheerful. It showed old men playing chess in rooms that looked like waiting areas. It didn't smell like sawdust. It didn't sound like my home. Is this about me? I asked. Or the house? Silence. Then Claire laughed, a nervous trill. Of course it's about you. We want what's best. But let's be honest, this house is a lot. Too much for one person. Especially someone your age, Daniel added. They smiled like it was settled. That evening, after they left, I sat in Maria's chair and stared at the fireplace. I ran my hands over the wood grain of the table I'd built for our 25th anniversary. The thought took root, they don't see it anymore. Not the love, the work, or the meaning. Just square footage and potential resale value. The following week, they came again. This time with a man they introduced as, just a friend, from a realty office. An informal estimate, Daniel said. No pressure. The man walked through my home with a clipboard, nodding, murmuring things like, original trim, solid foundation, good bones. I followed in silence, my hands clenched behind my back. After he left, Claire chirped, it's worth more than we thought. Isn't that amazing? Amazing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, touching everything Maria and I had built. The dent in the hallway where the kids rode tricycles. The coat rack made from barn wood. The small crack in the windowpane she refused to replace because, it's got character. They saw it all as inventory. A few days later, I found a document slipped into my mail pile. A transfer of ownership form, half completed. Daniel's name already printed. My signature line left blank. I stared at it for an hour. Then I placed it in Maria's recipe box, where I kept things I couldn't throw away. That weekend, I overheard them again. Once he signs, we'll renovate. Open concept kitchen, maybe knock out that weird pantry wall. He's going to resist. Then we say it's what he wanted. That he was getting forgetful. He's not forgetful. Daniel sighed. He's alone. That's close enough. They were rewriting my story in real time. Turning me into a confused old man so their plan looked like mercy. I looked around at the life they were trying to erase. And I made a decision. The next morning, before the sun rose, I packed a single bag. One change of clothes, Maria's photo, our marriage certificate, and my deed, still in my name. I made coffee, sat one last time in the kitchen chair I'd carved, then walked out the front door. No goodbye. No confrontation. They wouldn't get to say I was too confused to choose. Because I was choosing. And I chose to disappear before they could erase me. The bus out of town sighed and hissed like an old animal, and I let it carry me without resistance. I had only one suitcase, packed not with necessities, but with symbols. Maria's photograph. The small blue shawl she wore the last spring before she passed. My wedding ring, strung on a leather cord. And the deed to the house that still bore my name, mine alone. I watched the landscape change through the dusty window. Familiar roads gave way to strange intersections, and still I felt nothing. No grief. No rage. Just the numbness of a man whose well had run dry. The senior residence was a clean, beige building on the outskirts of a quieter town. Not the kind of place you dream about. The kind of place where you're supposed to fade. The manager, Elsie, met me at the front desk. She was kind. Efficient. She said all the right things and never asked why I was alone. My new room was small. One bed. A dresser. A window that overlooked a row of young trees trying to grow in stony soil. I stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. The silence inside was thicker than what I'd left behind. I didn't unpack that first night. I placed Maria's photo on the nightstand and sat in a chair by the window until dawn. I didn't cry. There was no one to hear me, and that made the silence feel heavier. In the morning, I walked the halls. I found the dining room. The library. The recreation room. Each place filled with echoes of lives adjusting to invisibility. No one stared, but no one smiled either. We were all ghosts, in training. I wrote letters. Long ones. Quiet ones. Mostly to Maria. Sometimes to the children. Never to Daniel or Claire directly, only to the memories of who they were, once. Today, I passed a little girl holding her grandfather's hand. They were both smiling. I remember when Claire did that. Before she forgot what my hand felt like. Another letter, Maria, I don't know if this counts as keeping my promise. You said to protect what we built. I couldn't save the house, but I saved myself. Is that enough? I folded each letter with precision. Placed them in a drawer. They were not for mailing. They were for surviving. Some days, I sat in the courtyard and watched clouds drift without purpose. The sun moved over my shoulders like a clock that no longer mattered. I drank coffee that tasted like memory. I listened to the shuffle of slippers on tile floors and wondered how many people here had also been loved and then forgotten. I noticed my own reflection one morning in the glass of the front door. I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked old, I always knew I was aging, but because I looked weightless. As if something vital had been pulled from me. I missed the creak of the stairs, the scrape of my chair across the kitchen tile, the warm scent of bread Maria used to bake. I missed the way the house breathed with me. Here, the walls didn't know my name. I missed being needed. Even in silence. There were flashes of emotion, anger, mostly. It came in odd bursts. I'd hear a song from a dusty radio or catch a whiff of turpentine from the art room, and I'd feel it flare in my chest. A sharp, sudden ache that had nowhere to go. I never spoke of it. At night, I replayed every conversation. Every favor I'd granted. Every moment of trust. I remembered the eyes of my grandchildren when they were still full of awe. I remembered thinking that my love would protect them from becoming cold. I'd been wrong. One afternoon, I wandered into the community garden behind the building. It was mostly weeds and wilted herbs. I found a patch of soil that hadn't been touched. My fingers dug in without thinking. The dirt was dry. Stubborn. Just like me. I planted nothing. I only wanted to feel something living in my hands. A resident named Gordon sat beside me the next day. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said, "They all leave eventually. The ones who promise they won't." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He understood. Sometimes I'd imagine them finding the empty house. Walking in with keys that no longer fit. Claire calling my name with a hint of annoyance. Daniel staring at the blank walls, realizing too late that the story had moved on without them. I'd wonder if they looked for me. If they called the police. If they laughed about it over drinks. If they grieved at all. I stopped wondering after a while. Because even grief is a kind of connection. And they no longer had that from me. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky the same color as Maria's favorite shawl, I dreamed of our house again. Only this time, it was locked from the inside, and I was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch. Maria stood behind the screen door, smiling. "You came home," she said. I didn't answer. I just listened to the wind. And when I woke up, I realized, I hadn't left home. I had carried it with me all along. It didn't happen in a single moment. Not with a bolt of lightning, or a grand speech delivered in defiance. It was slower. Like dawn breaking through heavy fog. The understanding grew inside me, steady and deliberate. The first change came when I stopped checking the drawer where I kept the letters. They no longer needed additions. I had written all the sorrow I could put into words. There was no more left to bleed onto paper. Then, one morning, I made my bed not because it was expected, but because I wanted to see it neat. I placed Maria's shawl over the pillow and sat beside it, not as a widower mourning, but as a man ready to begin again, however quietly. I joined the morning walk group. At first, I didn't speak. Just kept pace with the others. But soon, I began to nod at greetings, respond to small talk, notice things, the uneven path near the north gate, the way the gardener talked to the roses, as if coaxing them. On Wednesdays, I began volunteering in the library, dusting old books and repairing bindings. I liked the smell. It reminded me of the room we had at home, the one I filled with novels I swore I'd read one day. Here, I started reading them. I began to listen, too. Gordon told me about the wife he'd lost to cancer and the daughter who hadn't called in 4 years. Elsie shared stories of her father, who taught her to drive by letting her steer the tractor through a wheat field. I became someone again, not Grandpa, not the old man with the deed, but George. Just George. And with every passing day, I remembered who I had been before they tried to shrink me into a signature and a sales pitch. One afternoon, I was sitting in the sunlit corner of the library, rereading a line from a poetry book Maria loved: "What you love, you must protect. Even from those you love." I closed the book and rested my hand on it for a long time. That night, I opened my drawer and took out the deed. Still untouched. Still mine. I stared at it, not with fear, but with finality. They hadn't won. They hadn't erased me. I had walked away before they could decide who I was. The next morning, I visited the town's legal aid office. A small place, tucked between a tailor and a bakery. I sat with a lawyer, young, serious, gentle, and laid out everything. My house is mine, I said. But I want to make sure it stays mine, or goes where I choose. I want a will. A clear one. He listened. He nodded. And together, we drafted something that felt like armor. My terms. My voice. My legacy, not to be sold, sliced, or whispered about. I named no family in it. I left the house to a historical preservation trust. Let them use it as a museum, or a shelter, or a quiet place for others who'd given too much. Let it hold stories, not transactions. When it was done, I felt lighter. Like a man who'd packed for a long journey and finally chosen the right direction. I walked out of the office and bought a cinnamon bun from the bakery next door. Maria had loved cinnamon. I sat on a bench and ate it slowly, smiling between bites. There was no thunder. No triumph. Just peace. The kind you earn, not the kind that's handed to you. I thought of them, Daniel and Claire. I imagined them sitting together, wondering where I'd gone. Wondering why I hadn't signed. Wondering why their plan dissolved like sugar in tea. I hoped, in a small and quiet way, that they'd look for me, not to reclaim, but to remember. But if they didn't, that was fine too. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. I didn't announce anything. No letters. No warnings. I simply vanished from their plan. They came to visit one weekend and found only silence. The curtains drawn. The locks changed. No note on the door, no forwarding address, no explanation. They searched the drawers where I kept the bills. The side table where the deed once sat. The living room, now emptied of the chair I used to sit in. The air inside had a different smell. Not abandoned, cleared. On the kitchen table, I left one envelope addressed to both of them. Inside, one sheet of paper. 12 words, you cannot inherit love. You must earn it. I owe you nothing. Back in my new town, I lived with purpose. Not vengeance, something quieter. I began the work of taking back what was mine, starting with the paperwork. I met with the bank, the lawyer, the notary. Every institution that once bore their names in quiet expectation now bore none. I redirected everything. Life insurance, savings, even the deed. I left the house to a heritage fund that would preserve it, not sell it. Let it stand, not be flipped or gutted or stripped of its soul. The furniture I didn't take, I donated. The tools, I boxed up for a trade school. Maria's books went to a library we used to visit when the kids were young. Everything had a place, a purpose. Just not for them. In doing this, I felt something I hadn't in months, relief. And then, without fanfare, I began to rebuild my days. I bought myself a second-hand bike. I went to the weekly market and spoke to the bread vendor who reminded me of an old friend. I joined the woodworking class, not just to teach, but to create. Birdhouses, shelves, picture frames. Each piece was given away. I asked nothing in return. Only that they be used, appreciated, seen. One man gave a birdhouse to his granddaughter. Another woman placed her carved frame on a memorial table for her late husband. I made a bench and left it beneath a tree in the local park. I carved into the wood, for the weary, from someone who's been there. And then the letter came. Grandpa, where are you? We came to the house, it's empty. We don't know what happened. Please, just let us know you're all right. No return address. No apology. Just confusion masked as concern. I wrote a reply and never mailed it. You came to take. You left empty-handed. You call that worry. I call it timing. I let them sit with that silence. I imagined them pacing, retracing steps, checking with neighbors, wondering where the plan had failed. The truth is, it didn't fail. It never began. Because I never agreed to be part of it. They didn't lose me to time or illness. They lost me to their own actions. At the residence, I became something else entirely. I read stories to children at the library. I helped fix broken chairs for neighbors. I even adopted a stray cat, an old orange thing that slept in my window and yawned louder than any man I've known. I started keeping a new kind of notebook. Not of betrayals, but of kindnesses. The stranger who bought me coffee. The boy who gave up his seat on the bus. The girl who returned my dropped handkerchief with a curtsy like it was wartime again. I didn't need revenge in the old sense. I needed life in the true sense. And that's what I chose. But still, some nights, I imagined it, Daniel walking up the path with the papers in hand, only to find the locks changed. Claire peering through the windows of her would-be investment, seeing only bare walls and an echo too honest to ignore. And I smiled. Not out of triumph, but out of clarity. They would remember me, not for what I gave, but for what I took away, access. And I gave that not out of anger, but out of peace. A peace they would never touch, because it wasn't left to them. It didn't happen all at once. The unraveling began in the smallest ways, just as mine had. Claire returned to the house 3 more times, hoping maybe I'd come back. The first time, she brought flowers. The second, a man from an agency, likely a realtor still hopeful. The third time, she came alone, her face drawn, eyes tired. The neighbors told her I had moved. That's all they knew. That's all I left behind. She left a note in the mailbox. Please call me. We're sorry. We miss you. It never reached me. The mail was redirected. I read it eventually, sitting by my window, the ink already faded. I folded it once, then again, and placed it beneath Maria's photo. Daniel tried to call the lawyer. He tried to revive the paperwork. But everything had changed, names removed, intentions made clear. When he learned the house was no longer theirs to inherit, he didn't call. He sent one short email, "I don't understand. I thought we were helping you." I never replied. In their silence, I imagined discomfort growing. Not the anguish of grief, but the ache of consequence. The moment when you realize the door has not just closed, it has locked. Their friends would ask, what happened to the house? And they would have no answer that didn't taste of shame. Claire's wedding was the next spring. I was not invited. But I saw the photos online, through a shared link I had never asked for. She stood beneath an arch of flowers, smiling with tight eyes. There was no grandfather's dance. No mention of family beyond her parents. I wondered if the guests noticed. Daniel's business went under 6 months later. One of those articles popped up in my feed. Promising startup faces lawsuit over mismanaged funds. The kind of headline that drips. He'd burned through the last of his favors. The people he counted on weren't there to pick up the pieces. I knew that silence well. And still, I felt no joy in it. Only understanding. Because this wasn't punishment. This was life catching up. I continued with my quiet days. The woodworking class grew. We made furniture for the community center. Toys for children's hospitals. I found peace in repetition, in wood, in tools, in time. One day, Elsie knocked on my door. "You have a visitor," she said, unsure. It was Claire. She stood in the hallway, holding nothing. Not flowers. Not a gift. Just herself. "I found you," she said softly. I stepped aside. Let her sit. We didn't speak for a while. Then she asked, "Why did you disappear?" I looked at her, really looked. She had aged since I last saw her. Not in years, in weight. The kind that settles behind the eyes. "I didn't disappear," I said. "You just stopped seeing me." She nodded. "I thought I was doing what made sense." "I didn't realize it hurt you." It wasn't just hurt, I replied. It was erasure. You didn't ask me what I wanted. You told me what I needed. And then tried to take what I built. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't reach to comfort her. That was not mine to give anymore. I miss you, she whispered. I miss who you used to be, I said. She didn't stay long. Before she left, she said, if you ever want to come back. I am back, I said. She paused, then nodded again, more slowly. And when the door closed, I felt no relief. Just clarity. They weren't villains. Just lost. Just greedy. Just human. But I had built something stronger than their want, a life that no longer needed them to be complete. It was winter when Daniel finally came. I saw him through the window first, his shoulders hunched, his coat ill-fitted like it had once belonged to confidence. He stood at the edge of the walkway for a long time, hands in his pockets, unsure. Elsie had called up ahead. There's someone asking for you. Says he's your grandson. I told her to send him through. When he entered, he looked around like a man walking into a memory he no longer had permission to claim. The walls of my small apartment bore no family photos. Only shelves of books, carvings, and a single framed picture of Maria, smiling in the garden. Hi, he said. Just one word, as if we were beginning again. We weren't. I offered him a seat. Poured tea. Nothing more. He looked tired. His eyes carried stories he hadn't told yet. But I wasn't there for his confessions. I was there for the truth. I came to apologize, he began, voice low. And to explain. Not because I think it will fix things. But because you deserve to hear it. I nodded but didn't speak. We thought we were doing the right thing, he said. We saw you alone, and we panicked. We made decisions out of fear, and greed, I guess. It wasn't just about helping you. We saw the house as a way to make our lives easier. That's the truth. I stared at him. Not coldly. Just clearly. I know. He blinked, taken aback. You do. I heard you. More than once. You weren't quiet. He lowered his eyes. I was ashamed for a while. Then angry. Angry that you left. That you didn't even give us a chance to explain. I raised an eyebrow. Did you offer one? No, he admitted. The silence between us stretched, not uncomfortable, but honest. I lost a lot, he said finally. Money. Friends. The company. And I started wondering what I had built, and whether it was worth anything. Sometimes you don't know what you've lost until you sit in the quiet, I said. He looked at me then, not as a grandson pleading for restoration, but as a man facing the result of his own making. I'm not asking for the house, he said. I know it's gone. I know what you did with it. I'm just asking if you'll talk to me again. I thought of all the mornings I spent in that garden, all the birthdays remembered by checks instead of visits, all the times I waited for a call that never came. You thought I'd be grateful to be taken care of, I said. But you never asked what I wanted. You planned around my absence. You wrote me out before I was gone. He nodded slowly. I know. And I'm sorry. We sat quietly. Outside, snow started to fall, soft against the window. It reminded me of Maria's favorite days, the kind where the world hushed just long enough to hear your own heart. I can't be what you remember, he said. But I'd like to try to be someone new. If you'd let me. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But it was a door. And this time, I held the key. You can write, I said. You can visit. I don't promise anything else. He nodded, accepting the terms like a man finally understanding the value of boundaries. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. Is there anything you want? Yes, I said. I want you to build something that no one can take from you. And never try to claim what wasn't earned again. He left with no hug, no handshake. Just a quiet closing of the door. And I felt, for the first time, like the house I built was no longer under threat. It wasn't dramatic. There was no curtain call, no sweeping music. Just life, soft and ordinary, returning in quiet moments. I began waking up before dawn again, not from restlessness but because I wanted to see the first light. The way it reached gently across the trees outside my window reminded me of Maria's fingertips on my back each morning. Gentle. Intentional. Present. I made my tea in silence and sipped it while watching the sun rise. The steam curled like smoke from the past, lifting memories without weight. I didn't chase them anymore. They came and went like weather, respected, accepted, and let go. The old orange cat, now a fixture in the community, followed me to the courtyard most mornings. He'd sprawl out beneath the bench I'd built, the one with the plaque. I started calling him Sunday. He never answered, but I liked the way it sounded. In the woodworking room, I found new projects to focus on. I started making toys, small animals, trains, puzzles. A local school began accepting them, and the children sent back thank you notes. One said, "I like the dog you made. He's my favorite color. You must be kind." I framed that one. Elsie began inviting me to more community events. At first, I resisted. Then I started attending the occasional game night, poetry reading, even a cooking class. I wasn't particularly skilled, but I laughed. Really laughed. That, I hadn't done in a long time. Every month, I wrote one letter to Maria. It wasn't to mourn. It was to share. I told her about the boy who danced in the courtyard with his grandmother, about the tomato plant that finally bloomed. About how the light in my room shifted through the seasons. I never asked her for signs anymore. I had all the answers I needed. Daniel wrote sometimes. Simple postcards, never pushy. A quote he read. A story from his new job. A photo of a tree that reminded him of one we planted together. I replied occasionally. Briefly. But with sincerity. Claire never returned. Not in person. Not by letter. But I saw her name once, listed as a donor to the preservation fund I'd left the house to. A quiet gesture. I received no message, but I understood. Some bonds, when broken, do not heal in the same form. But that doesn't mean they don't mend. Winter melted into spring. The courtyard filled with blossoms, children's laughter, and the creak of old swings. I found myself humming again. Little tunes Maria used to sing while folding laundry. I didn't realize I remembered them until I heard them in my own voice. One day, a neighbor asked, "Do you miss it? The house?" I looked at him, smiled, and said, "No. Because what I loved about it is already with me." I had learned to hold joy lightly. Not with fear of losing it, but with trust that it would return. That was the lesson Maria had taught me without ever saying a word. And in the quiet of my new home, surrounded by people who saw me, not for what I owned, but for who I chose to be, I finally rested. Not from exhaustion. But from peace. And so, the house they tried to take became a story they could no longer rewrite, and I, the man they thought they could move like furniture, became something they never expected. Unmoved. Rooted not in land or title, but in choice. And in that choice, I finally came home.